So today we have a special guest speaker, Kevin Compton. And Kevin is a great friend of mine personally and Valley Christian Schools. We really became acquainted when he enrolled his students at Valley Christian Schools, and probably one of the great, just wonderful things is the Compton family. Gayla's his wife. She's an amazing woman. And then we have Elena, graduated in 2002 from Valley Christian Schools. She went to Duke. She's living in London right now. And then we have Cameron, graduated in 2006. He was a great football player at Valley Christian, went to Notre Dame, and is now a Navy SEAL. And plans to be a Navy SEAL as long as he's healthy. He looks like a 49er linebacker right now. He's really a sharp guy. So it's an amazing story to hear about Kevin Compton and all that God has accomplished and is accomplishing through his life. So I just want to give you a few highlights. Listen to this, and then when you hear him speak, you'll realize how important it is to be able to hear a person that's a strong, committed Christian who is really used of God in entrepreneurial kind of opportunities. So before founding Radar Partners, at an early stage venture capital partnership, Kevin was partner with Kleiner Perkins, one of Silicon Valley's most successful technology venture capital firms, for almost 20 years. He and his partners invested in many of the most powerful and high-profile startups over the past 30 years, including Google, American Online, Compaq Computers, Lotus Development, Sun Microsystems, Intuit, VeriSign, Tandem Computers, Genentech, Citrus Systems, Netscape Communications, Amazon.com, and Juniper Networks. Listen to this. These companies employ over 300,000 people. They have annual sales in excess of $100 billion annually and carry a public market value in excess of $300 billion. Kevin has been featured in many technology publications. He's been profiled in Fortune, Forbes magazines, and has been ranked one of the top 10 venture capitalists in the world over the last decade. The Forbes Media Touch ranking of top investors has named Kevin as one of the top private investors in the world on numerous occasions, ranking him in the top 10 3 times. Outside of work, Kevin enjoys family time, playing hockey, and working with youth sports. His passion for sports extends into the professional sports arena as well. Kevin was the co-owner of the national hockey team, the San Jose Sharks, the American Hockey League, Worcestershire Sharks, and the Shark Sports and Entertainment from 2001 to 2012. Would you please welcome Kevin Compton?
Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. I know it's busy time. Football game tonight, lots going on. So what I want to do is I'll go through a few minutes of presentation, mostly on 2 areas. One is what it takes, what I look for when we invest in an early stage company. Those companies that Dr. Doherty mentioned were all basically 2 or 3 people when they came in to present, and we helped them grow to good size. The second thing we'll talk about is the 5 rules I kind of use on my daily life and how I make decisions, how I run through things. So it's going to be a little bit about what do we look for in companies, and what do I look for in leadership in those companies, and then the second phase is 5 rules that I try to get right on a daily basis. I'm going to make it interactive on the second half. Please feel free to ask questions. Nothing's out of bounds. Any question's fine. If I don't feel like answering, I'll tell you that. If I do like it, I'll tell you it's a good question. And then if you don't ask any questions, I'll come down there and ask you some questions one at a time, and it won't be as much fun for you. So be prepared with your questions. As Dr. Doherty said, my kids went here. Our daughter was here from 4th grade through graduation, then went to Duke University, and our son was a lifer, kindergarten through college, and then went to the University of Notre Dame. I was looking around, and I was lucky enough to find a paper from our kids. When I was looking through some of their stuff preparing for this, I looked up there, and how many of you have seen this equation, find x? right? You know what that, all right, good. So I found my son's work. There's X. So he was a good student here, played football, did a lot of good things. Questions I get when I take back and look over the kind of the 25 years of I've been investing in startup companies, some interesting questions are kind of common through them. Number one is, what's the number one thing, or the number one question people ask when they're starting a company? What's the most important thing in building a company? And what lessons do you try to pass on to promising entrepreneurs? They say, wow, you've done this before, can you help me do this? So what do we look for? What's the questions they ask? What are we looking for in building a company? What do they do? And do any of these lessons carry over from the sports world? Those are amazing, common questions people come in when they see us, that they ask those kind of questions. The good news about that is the answer to all those things is the same. How do you build a great company? What have I learned from watching great ventures succeed? What common characteristics do the ones who really made it happen have in common? Do any of those carry over to the sports world? Things like that. And the answer is yes, it's all about leadership. And here's the first thing I want you to take away, because most of you who are working on this President's Challenge or thinking about your startup are spending a whole lot of time thinking about a great, clever idea. Some brand new insights you've got, some brand new search algorithm you've got, some brand new personal, whatever it is, you've got some great product or service idea. And the truth is, it's always about the team. I will take, and I use B as, not the perfect, and we'll get between 6,000 and 8,000 business plans a year in my office, and we'll invest in 2 or 3. So we're only looking for the best we can possibly find. I'll always take a B idea, meaning that it may not be the most clever idea in the world, with a great A team over a great idea with a weaker team. Because the truth is, in that scenario, the weaker team will always take a great idea and make it weaker. And a great team will always make a good idea and make it great. And since these things take years and years to build, you'll always want the team over the idea every time. So what are some lessons I've learned from watching these companies succeed, and lessons that I think will be valuable for you as many of you think about starting companies or moving into an entrepreneurial role post your education? What have I learned? What have I seen? And one of the most important things I've seen from great leaders, because remember I said leadership matters more than the idea. One of the great things I've seen is the great leaders never guess. People come to them with lots of questions. They have lots of things. Their email box is full. People are asking them questions all day. You're the CEO of your company. You're just being deluged with questions. They never guess. It's okay as a leader to say, I don't know, or let me find out, or I'll get the answer and get back with you. And by the way, great leaders always get back with them. If you're going to tell somebody in your organization, let me look that up and get back with you, and then you never get back with them, you failed. You've got to get back with them if you say you're going to get back with them. Honesty and transparency is always preferred over guessing. Great leaders are really honest and really transparent. They don't mind saying they don't know, because they want to have that same kind of open and transparent relationship with their staff and with their team. It's okay to say you don't know. It's not okay not to get the answer. It's okay not to have the answer up front. It's really important to know that difference. Don't guess. Don't guess. Leaders base their decisions on facts, as known at the time. Now, there's a little sub-point there, as I say, as known at the time. If you'll say, wow, I talked to my CEO, my president, my department manager, whatever it happens to be in your career, and they told me at this point in time it was brown, and now 2 years later they say it's blue. Actually, that's not so bad, because either the facts changed or they realized they made a mistake or whatever it is. Don't be afraid to change it if you get new facts and get new learnings. Don't guess. When you're writing your business plans, you're doing your science projects, you're doing your homework, don't guess. Go get the answer. It's okay not to know the answer. It's not okay not to get the answer. Number 2, silence is silver, insights are gold. One of the things I've also found about great leaders is great leaders are often quite quiet. People admire the strong, quiet type, who are confident enough to let others, talk, and strong enough to speak to when they really have something to add to the conversation. So you don't have to be, some of us have seen these very charismatic leaders who are very bold and very open and very, driving and demonstrative and things like that. That's not really what most people want. They want thoughtful leaders who let people in their organizations make decisions, who encourage them to take leadership roles and sit back and listen quietly and try to get to the right answer for them. I was talking to one of your board members earlier, and his son works at Google. And there's been articles written of late that Larry Page they say, and we'll see over time, is maybe one of the best CEOs ever. Well, if you've been around Larry, he's a very strong, quiet type. He listens, he lets the team fill him in, he doesn't try to be the dominant voice in the room. He makes a good impression on his people. But one thing I learned a long time ago, long before you guys were involved, but it was in the mid-90s, and we had backed a company called Netscape, which was the first browser that became really the front end to the interface. I'm sure most of you use Chrome or something like that today. Netscape was the first version of that. We were sitting around in a meeting in the mid-90s, and the CEO's name was Jim Clark, and he had hired a man in from AT&T named Jim Barksdale. And we were all arguing about how much should we charge for the browser, how much should we charge for this, how much should we charge for that. Microsoft hadn't entered the browser market at that time. The Microsoft Explorer wasn't working at the time. Well, it still doesn't work, but anyway, it wasn't in the market at the time. And we were sitting around having this discussion about how much should we charge for this. And Jim Barksdale, this big, giant Southern gentleman, quietly listened to us talk and argue back and forth for quite a while. And then he finally asked the question that said, how do we know others, in this case it turned out to be Microsoft, won't just give the browser away? And you looked back 5 or 8 years later, and no matter all the work we did, no matter how good the code was, no matter how good our marketing was, no matter how good the logo worked, how nice the offices were, how good the free lunches were, that was the only question that mattered. And so great leaders know that the question is way more important than the answer. And I want you to take that away. Don't guess, and have the confidence to realize that asking the question is way more important than knowing the answer. In the end, Barksdale's question was the only one that really mattered. Managing up versus managing down. I'll tell you what I mean on that one. So managing down is way more important than managing up. I like to say that good leaders know a lot more about the night watchman's habits, his family, what he's doing or he or she's doing in their life, than they know what the CEO's favorite sandwich is so they can take it to him right before lunch. Good leaders look in their organization, and if they see someone who's constantly just managing up, do you know what managing up means? Kissing up, that's another phrase. Sucking up, whichever phrase you like. Trying to take care of the boss, but not taking care of your own staff. Good managers look down and see that and go, I really don't want anything to do that. I really want people who know when people know when you're managing up, and I want people who follow this last line here, which is, you've probably heard many times. If you haven't, I'll be glad to introduce it to you because it's something I try to use every day, which is, in an organization, people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's a phrase I stole from somebody years ago in my career, and I think it really matters, and I think it's really, really important. That how much you care matters a lot more in your organization than how much you know. It really does matter. Make your calendar your to-do list. And I'll go through this one quickly, because I use this one with, I'm treating you as a bunch of CEOs today of companies. If you have something to do, don't put it on a to-do list. I hate to-do lists. All right? Put it on your calendar. Because if you put it on your calendar, then when that moment comes, one thing's for sure in the calendar, that time will come. And when it gets there, then you'll have time to do the task. But just organizing, I had a guy who worked for me a long time ago who was the world's greatest to-do list maker. And he had them organized and color-coded, and he always talked about how he made A, B's, and C's tasks, and his job was to do the A's, and all I ever saw him do was make to-do lists. I never saw him actually get anything done. And he would always say, well, I don't have time. And I'd say, well, you got to mark your calendar and don't put it on a to-do list, put it on the calendar so when the time comes, you'll have time to do it. The good news is you'll get a lot more done. The bad news is you become a slave to your calendar, but there's always a trade-off. The rhythm of anticipation. This is one of my lines that hopefully someone will find some interest in today. I like to talk about a lot, the rhythm of anticipation. Great leaders don't just think about the next move, but they think about the several moves after that. Any chess players in here? Right? How important is it to make them one move? That you got to get the next several moves of where you're going and then, of course, how people are going to combat that. So you have to think a lot about not just the next move, but the next several moves. Great leaders aren't just always going like this. They've got a goal here and a point here, and they're trying to do everything they can do to get in a straight line to that, thinking several moves out. You have to balance current needs, which you can't ignore because there are current needs, with what's going to happen next. When I was on the board of a company called VeriSign, they're the company that when you type in www.whatever, it goes there. They do all the routing in the world. How many of you have you ever seen that fail? Pretty cool, huh? You think about it. So in the mid-90s, when the gentleman was running the engineering organization for us, we challenged him to go out and say, and this is when we were doing probably 15 million page resolutions a day. And we challenged him to go back and say, okay, show us a way we can build a back-end infrastructure that will handle 100 million a day. So I remember the look on his face like that was really not the right question. He went away and he came back to the next board meeting 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, and came back with an architecture that was this gigantic dollar request and gigantic staffing request and said, I'm going to do something that is 100 billion a day, not 100 million a day. And I said, that's nice. Sounds like you just want a lot of money and a lot of people. And he said, no, and then he convinced us that that's where this was going. And earlier this year, VeriSign had a day where they did 100 billion page URLs around the world. And now, of course, their system handles, I think it's 2 trillion or something. I mean, scaled to. It'll be a while before they find that one out. But you have to think ahead. You have to think about what's next, what's coming down the road, not just what the short term is, but what the long term is. Another line that a lot of people, actually somebody made so much fun of me on this one, they actually gave me a t-shirt with this on it one time, because I said it so many times to them. It was one of those people, when you asked them what time it was, they told you how to build a watch. And I would constantly say to them, shorten your answers, shorten your replies. I sent you a 12-word message email, and you sent me back a 40-page document. That's not how it works. Stop doing that. You've got. I always say over-communicate in as few words as possible. Anybody know who that is? Churchill. Anybody confused on what that meant? Never, never, never give up. Not very confusing, is it? It's actually pretty good leadership, too. It was a commencement speech. Very, very powerful. The other one he had is when he was talking to Lady Astor. She said, Winston, if you were my husband, I'd put poison in your coffee. And he said, if you were my wife, I would drink it. No confusion about how he felt about her or how she felt about him. You didn't have to write a book or have a movie or take a story. They didn't like each other. It was very easy to understand. You can really communicate a lot in short messages. And Winston Churchill, if you ever want a fun book to read, just read his book of quotes. I think the longest one is 2 sentences. And he found a way to communicate a lot in a few words. It's really important to give crisp answers. One of the things that your future bosses will look for when they ask you a yes-no question, what do you think they'll be looking for as the first word out of your mouth? Yes or no. Fine, you can give color, you can just give supporting words, you can go on, but they really want to know the yes or no first. And sometimes you can say yes, but, or there's more to it, but give a yes or no. Give the answer. Servant leadership. I've heard a lot about leadership, and a lot of people say, that it's you're born with it, or you're not born with it, or that it's earned, or that it's revealed over time. There's a lot of things about leadership, but I'll give you a good example here. I agree that it's hard to define, and it's hard to put into a formula. And deep down, I really feel that great leaders are servant leaders. They follow a biblical principle of servant leadership, and I think it's really, really important. And I'll give you the most powerful example in my life. He's a dear friend of mine, and so many of us, September 11, 2001, changed our lives. But when you hear this story, I want you to think not so much about what happened that day, although that day is important to the context of it, but what this man did on that day. On September 11, 2001, my friend Jimmy Dunn, was not in his office in the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. He was out playing golf. He was not in his office that day. Of the 83 employees he had in his office that day, 17 of them made it out alive. So he had the office on the on one of the top floors. The planes hit the building went down. He lost 66 of his 87 employees. Of the 66 who died, 2 of them were his business partners. His name is Jimmy Dunn. The firm at the time was named Dunn, Sandler, and O'Neill. So remember that. At the time, it was named Dunn, Sandler, and O'Neill. Jimmy had told his two partners about maybe 6 months earlier in the spring of 2001 that he said, I'm going to step back, I'm going to work on my golf game, I'm going to enjoy the success we've had, I won't be in the office that much starting next year. Well, on September 12th, 2001, Jimmy had a very different mindset. He's a wonderful Christian man who said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of all 66 families who were in my employ. I'm going to take care of them. He extended their bonus programs, he extended their pay programs, he extended their benefits. One family was on their benefits programs for another 6 years before they got their life back together from that tragedy. And he really gave that day. He asked the surviving employees, who were 17, he said, we're going to rebuild the company, and I need you to take greater responsibility. I need you to lead. I can't have 17 direct reports. I need you guys to all take over and take charge. Then he wrote 66 eulogies and went to 66 funerals in a 3-week period of time, which you can imagine that was not fun. Two of them were his business partners. Many of them had been with him for 20 years. At the end of 2001, as I said, he paid off the bonuses, took care of their benefits. Jimmy's leadership has been greatly recognized since that time. The thing he wanted to do that he thought, was lower his golf score, enjoy life more, add more value, get more meaning out of life. Well, I can tell you that today Jimmy is working hard. They've relocated to the 4th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan. He can't find anything on the ground floor. If he could, he would take it. The 4th floor was the lowest he could find. But he became a servant leader. He took, in his new structure in the new office, he sits in the middle with no office around. He is there to help them and serve them all the time. He's gotten recognition from the president, from the Secretary of State, from the military for the way he took care of people and showed great leadership during that time. His company today is wildly successful, doing great things because he took a servant leadership approach. He didn't panic, he didn't roll over, he was very sad, but he took a leadership approach and he served his people first. He knows what it takes to be a servant leader. So the things I take away from the companies that have worked well at a high level, the common themes against them all is the great leaders always seek the right answer. They don't guess. They say, what is the right answer? And they work to find it. They listen closely before they speak. They're quiet. They listen. They let their employees try to lead them through that. They're organized. They have their to-do list, but it's on the calendar, and then they care about their people, and they really lead with a servant's heart. It really is the people over the technology. I know a lot of you, when you get into a program like this, the first thing you think is, I need my great idea. And what you're going to learn is you need a great team. You need a great group of people that you can work with on a project. The ideas will come. You get the right people together working on a similar mission, the ideas will come, the products will come. Very few companies are built on single product inspiration. They're really built because of the teams. Now I'm going to take you through my 5 simple rules, which I've talked about to a lot of people, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Where I got these 5 rules, which we'll go through quickly, I got them from my experience, which is a code word for mistakes I've made over the years. I got them from successes, which is a code word for being at the right place at the right time. Being a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley in the 90s and 2000s, it wasn't easy, but it was the right place at the right time, that's for sure. From observation, which is a code word for plagiarism, which of course isn't allowed, so I didn't steal any of the ideas. And then from failures, which of course needs no code words. So that's the backdrop against where I got these 5 rules, which I hope you'll either write down or get something out of, because I've used them a lot. I've been fortunate enough to talk to a lot of people about them around the world, and it's the most requested thing I get is people come back and say, could you go through those 5 rules with our company or our employees? I've had a few wives say, could you go through them with my husband? My wife has asked me if I've ever read them myself. So, number 1, the golden rule. Who knows what the golden rule is? Somebody. Do unto others as you want to. Don't forget that last part, yeah. Treat others the way you want to be treated, okay? Matthew 7:12. I start off with this in business settings, and people go, wow, you're quoting the Bible to start off a business pitch. And I say, yeah, because it works. It's scaled for a couple thousand years. It's probably going to scale a lot longer. I'll guarantee you it lasts a lot longer than the latest microprocessor. It is the greatest rule in business. Treat others the way you want to be treated, from your employees to your customers to each other, and it will make a huge difference. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It is the most important thing in business today. Number 2, have a sense of urgency. You may know what a sense of urgency is. Speak up. I'm not going to call on just. Right. You want to get. I had that guy who I talked about who had the color-coded to-do lists. All right. They were beautiful, but he never got anything done. And I would always say to him, "Don't write it down. Just do it." Half the things I asked him to do, he could have got done in the time he was getting out his color-coded pens. Just do it if you can possibly do it. Have a sense of urgency. Get things done. It makes a huge difference in how you work, how people will look at you in your careers. If you're working with your team and you're working on a plan, you need to be organized and you need to have a process. But if there's something that is important and you can just take care of it right away, having a sense of urgency will really set you apart from everyone else. So treat others well. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Customers, friends, peers, employees, bosses, everything like that. And then have a sense of urgency. Number 3, make an effort. Make an effort. And then the subtext to this, if we were spending more time on this topic, in make an effort, is realize that results will vary. Your effort doesn't have to, your effort shouldn't vary. It should always be your best effort. Results will vary. On the left here, I've got Super Bowl pictures of people who have built dynasty organizations. The 49ers, the Cowboys, and the Steelers. Look how many Super Bowls those 3 organizations have. Okay. What's the difference between those organizations with all those Super Bowls and the Miami Dolphins? It's a trick question, so I won't point you out. In 1972, the Miami Dolphins went 17-0. That's when it was a 14-game season and 3 playoff games, including the Super Bowl. They were perfect. They're the only team, thanks to the Patriots choking a few years ago, who have gone in an undefeated season and won the Super Bowl. But when I take pictures and put up a picture and say, wow, who are the dynasty football teams over the years? You get the 49ers, you get the Steelers, you get the Cowboys, you get the Patriots, but I just couldn't put it up there. You get great organizations who are dynasties, but were they ever perfect? How many of them, like in today's 16-game season, how many of them do you think went into the season going, come on, guys, let's put our effort into it, we can be 12-4? No, they think they're going to be undefeated, and that's certainly their goal, but they never were. But the only team that was is not recognized as a dynasty team. And the great lesson for you to take away from this is continual effort over time is way more important than momentary perfection. Believe me, the Dolphins would trade a 17-0 one year for 4 or 5 more Super Bowl trophies. Effort over time is way more important than momentary perfection. Does anybody know the story of Derek Redmond in the 92 Olympics in Barcelona? Go look him up on YouTube sometime. By the way, have Kleenex nearby. Those of you who are Olympic fans like I am, I've been to 9 Olympics around the world. He's probably one of the most remembered athletes you'll ever see. He went into the 400 meter in 92 in Barcelona as the by far favorite to win. He had won the world championships. His times were well ahead of everyone else. The 400 meters started off. He was one of those ones that wasn't one of those ones that came back at the end and finished strong. He was one of those runners in a 400 meter that led from the first step to the end. He was just the fastest 400 meter of his era. And so when the Olympics came and he had gone through the preliminaries and gone through the time trials and got to the final, so it was the gold medal run, he got off there, and at the 300 meter mark, he was well ahead of everyone else. And all of a sudden, he reached down and his hamstring went out. And I'm not talking about like it was painful, it tore in 2. He did not stop, and he could hardly walk. His dad came out of the stands. They walked the last 100 meters. If you ask anybody who saw that live, watched it years later, if you watch it on YouTube now, that last 100-meter effort put him in the history books way more than another one of 107 gold medals given out at a Summer Olympics. He made the effort to finish what he started, and even though it wasn't going to create the gold medal, it created a tremendous moment in history for him. And he'll talk about it today. You know, his leg healed in a few months. Didn't compete in the Olympics again. But he'll talk about how he learned so much from that moment in time, what he went through in that moment. So make an effort. So treat others the way you want to be treated. Have a sense of urgency to get things done. Make an effort. Number 4, think big. Think big matters. And that's what this program is about for you, to think big. A lot of you may not know, but Jonathan Chichu used to play for the Sharks. And when he was in what in Canada they call grade 6, he wrote a paper. And it was the first year of the Sharks' existence, 1991. He was in grade 6 in Canada. And he was in Moose Factory, Ontario, Canada, which basically, if you go to Moose Factory, Ontario, Canada, you get there, but you just go to the North Pole and turn right. And that's where Moose Factory, Ontario, Canada is. Way, way, way north. They couldn't get to the island they lived on in the summer because the bridge melted. And so he was in a rural part of the world. His grandfather, who lives in Toronto, brought him a Sharks jacket in 1991, and he wrote a paper on career day in grade 6 saying he wanted to be a professional hockey player and play for the San Jose Sharks in grade 6. And people say, well, that's good. We don't have much TV coverage here, and you're not a very good skater. But otherwise, that's a good idea. Well, he worked super hard at it, got it going. His dad's a minister. They held bake sales and pie auctions, and the church was very generous to him, and they sent him down to Toronto to live with his grandfather, where he took skating lessons and learned. Well, who knew that on his 18-year year he turned 18, that in the fifth round of the draft, it would come around, the San Jose Sharks were looking for a right-handed forward, and they were down to the last few guys, and somebody said, hey, this guy can't skate, and he's from nowhere, but boy, he's got a gigantic heart. And so, at the time, Dean Lombardi said, we'll take him. It was not, no matter how anybody rewrites the history books, it was not an inspired choice at the time where they said, we stole one from the rest of the world. It was near the end of the draft. They needed a right-handed shooter. If you follow hockey in Canada, most of the guys are left-handed. He was a right-handed shooter, great. So we got him. Well, he went into the system, became a pro. His first years were in that hockey hotbed of Kentucky. So he started off there. And then he came off and then went up to Cleveland, where the minor league system was at the time. Started to play well. And in 2001, got the phone call that, hey, there's an injury up at the Sharks. It's your chance to come up. So excited. Driving home that night in Cleveland in January of 2001, slid his car on the ice and had a very serious car accident, cracked his skull. Went to the hospital, and the doctor says, well, it's not a big deal. It's a skull. They heal quickly. You'll be fine. You just have to, you have to be careful the rest of your life. And he said, well, be careful. I'm a hockey player. And he said, well, you were a hockey player until about an hour ago. You're done. And he said, no. And his parents came down. They prayed for him. The church stood up, prayed for him. They believed. He went back 3 months later to see the doctor, and the doctor took an X-ray of his skull and goes, wow, something's wrong here. I don't even see a hairline fracture. I can't find anything. You go ahead and do what you want. So he had to get back in. 2 weeks into it, was right at the end of the season. The playoffs were about to start. And the Sharks had another injury, and they called him up. His first game, gets a goal. For those of you who don't know, 4 years later, he was the scoring leader in the National Hockey League and won the trophy for for scoring more goals than anyone else. By the way, he played his first professional hockey game exactly when he said he would in grade 6. For the team he said he would play it for. He thought big. He was a big thinker. And no one ever dissuaded him. When they would tell him, you know where we're at on the globe, right? That's about 1 billion miles from here to California. In fact, they probably could have said to him at the time, find California on the map. And he would have said, let me get back with you on that. But he believed, he thought big, and he got it done. And then finally, think small. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Have a sense of urgency. Make an effort knowing that results are going to vary. Think big. Have a big vision. Really believe in something. But don't forget to think small. I try to start every day. It doesn't happen, but it probably happens 300 days a year, where I start every day after my prayer time of writing a thank you card. I write a thank you card to someone on my calendar from the day before. And if I can't think of somebody who did something the day before, I've got a long list of people I owe thank yous to. And I just send one out. Sometimes I'll send 3 or 4. Usually it's 1 or 2. But I'm thankful for so many things. And I owe so many people so many things that's what I try to do. What time is it? Yep. When my son, when he was 13, we went on a trip to the South Pacific. He's a gigantic World War II buff. And we were in the war islands of Tinian and Saipan and Tarawa. And we were out there on Tarawa, which was this terrible remote island in the middle of nowhere, right on the equator, 115 degrees. We were walking around this island, which is 300 yards wide at its widest point and about 2.5 miles long. That just happened to be a place that you could land a bomber on the way to Japan, or, from our point of view, they could land a bomber on the way to California. So it became a very important place for refueling because you couldn't fly planes of that size from Japan to the US at the time in the middle of World War II. So this little tiny island became very important. We were there visiting it. We'd been there for 3 days, no accommodations, not much food. We went to this, at the end of the island, there was a small, tiny, a quarter the size of this room, a fifth the size of this room, church. And we went there and we opened the door and we looked in and there was a nun praying in front. And I went, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." And she said, no, come in. We said, no, we're fine. She said, "No, come in. And she looked at us and she said, "Can I get you some water?" Well, I thought to myself, nah, no thanks. Drinking the local water in Tarawa probably isn't a good idea. And she looked at me and she said, "Don't worry, it's bottled water from Australia. And it's 115 degrees outside. We'd been sleeping in tent." I said, "Oh, sure, why not?" And then I watched her pour some water. She had this old refrigerator with a giant handle on the front from the 40s or 50s. Poured us some cold water, we drank it, and I looked over at my son and a man who was traveling with us, and I watched them basically look like life came back into their body and realized we were in bad shape. We were in bad shape, and I didn't really realize it at the time, but she knew it. And she took care of us. She, let us rest in there for a while, gave us a bunch of water, fixed sandwiches for us. So in that trip, my son, a World War II buff, we went from, we started back in Japan, we came out to Guam, Tarawa, Tinian, Saipan, finished at Pearl Harbor, did all those things. When we got home, the first story he told his friends was about a nun on the island of Tarawa who stopped what she was doing and poured us a glass of water. Because that was the most memorable thing of the whole trip for him. Someone did something small that really mattered. It's biblical, right? If you give a glass of water in my name, it's really important to think small, to take care of people. I had my first really only real boss in my life, besides my wife and kids and parents, and well, anyway, my only real career boss in my life was a Navy pilot, and he was a tough guy. And I remember one time we were going into a very important meeting, and we were working on it. It was hard to get the meeting set up. We had traveled. We had gone through the presentation many times. He was a tough guy. He's one of those guys that if he said, meet in the hotel lobby at 7 o'clock to leave, he left about 10 till 7. He's just a tough guy. And we were getting ready to go in this meeting, and one of the other guys that was with me had a personal crisis come up. Not critical, but it was a family issue. He stopped everything, said, the meeting can wait. We all loaded up in the car, and he drove the guy back to his house. So all the time that this guy put me through it for years, for 6 years, of all the overnight studies, of all the crazy things he made me do, I remember that moment of kindness. Moments of kindness, moments of taking care of people are going to be the most important things you do in your career. It is one of the most effective signs of leadership. So treat others the way you want to be treated. Have a sense of urgency. Try to get things done. Make an effort knowing it's not always going to be perfect. In fact, perfection is not as important as sustained effort. Think big, have a big idea, believe in yourself, believe in the idea, and then think small, because thinking small really, really matters. And of course, as we go into next week, be thankful. Be thankful. You have a lot to be thankful for. Amazing school, amazing friends, this great program, a lot of things. So be thankful. With that, we'll open it up for questions. There's going to be a couple mics, I think. And so wait till they bring you the mic. And if you have questions, we'll take them. Thank you. We got about 15 minutes, so we'll take them, and like I said, nothing's off bounds, and if you don't ask me questions, I'll ask you questions, one at a time, up here.
questions?
Any questions? You don't get to leave early anyway, so you got to stay here and ask them.
Hi. So you, in the beginning, talked about how a team is the most important thing. So how would you sum up a great team?
How do you
How would you sum up a great team?
sum up a great team? Well, one that, first of all, has respect for each other. The ones that where you don't see the people respecting each other, you know, it's terrible. And then the other thing is, and it's a little bit, I hope you guys, some of you are going to be presenting to me, when is that, Dr. Doherty? May 5th.
May
So I'll give
1st.
you one of the secrets for May of next year when you present. If one of you does all the talking and the others don't say anything and don't even look that interested, it's over. I don't care if you've brought me the next Google, all right? Because you won't be able to do it as a team, even if you've got a great idea. So everybody talks, everybody respects each other, everybody pays attention to each other, and I look for that mutual respect in a team. Right? Then, of course, there's that thing, right? Which is what they pay me for, to try to find that thing that recognizes a harmony, a passion, a drive, an intuition. Very rarely have I had that A and B scenario where I've had a great team with a bad idea. Great teams usually have great ideas too. So you look for a great idea, you look for great harmony, you look for great respect to each other. And if anybody who presents was here today and only one person talks, you're going to get fried. The Shark Tank will look like an easy walk compared to what I'll do to you in that meeting. All right? That should set you up well. Yes, right here. Right there. Oh, sorry.
What would you say is important in a good idea?
Okay, that's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question. That's a great question. So a good idea is, first of all, one that I can tell you have deep passion about. You believe and you can justify why it's going to work. Why, the example I like to give, not that it was an inspired moment, but it certainly worked well. Why people thought they'd get tired of getting out of their car to open a garage door. Somebody thought electric garage door opener would be a good idea, right? Well, the story goes that the person had unbelievable passion, and he wasn't just talking about garage doors opening. He was talking about keeping babies safe in cars and keeping you dry in winter storms and keeping, security so you didn't have to get outside at night. He didn't pitch that you were too lazy to go open a garage door. So he had a big idea. He packaged it well in a great idea, in a great value proposition. And then it's something that is probably unique. Now, unique is an interesting point of view because, remember, when we funded Google to do search, Yahoo had basically 95% of the search market. Now, their search was quite different, but the category wasn't different. So you don't have to invent a new category. But if you're going to go into a category where there's already a dominant player, your reason for being better be compelling, because it's hard to dislodge somebody. So a real value proposition, an idea you're really passionate about, a big market that works, and hopefully something that's unique to you. And unique can take very subtle differences. Oh, there's one in the back too.
What is the greatest lesson that you have learned from failures in your experience? You were listing different things that you were going to share with us. What's the greatest thing you learned from a failure?
Greatest thing I've learned from a failure is that it's not debilitating. It's just a failure. It's just a setback. It's a curve along the way. It is. I've been fortunate enough to hire many chief executive officers of companies who had been in the prior 3 to 6 months fired. And people say, why would you hire her? Why would you hire him? She was just fired. He was just fired. And I say, yeah, they learned a great lesson on someone else's nickel. It's my turn now to get the benefit of it. Okay? Failures are just ways to learn, sometimes in a painful way. But if you think you're not going to have failures along the way, you're not taking any risks and you're not doing anything important. Failures, I don't even like that word. I wish I could come up with a different word. Because I don't think failures denote some kind of tragic event. And they're usually not. They're usually life learning lessons, points in time. They're events. If you let them debilitate you, then you're done. If you let them be a time you can learn and grow from it, they're great. But I can guarantee you one thing, all of you in here, There's one thing you will all have in common 10 years from now. You have all failed at something if you tried anything. I'll guarantee you that. That doesn't mean that they're all going to fail, or that, but something along the way will be a failure for you. It's how you respond that matters the most.
I wanted to ask how you could deal with failure in this type of business.
I didn't hear the second part.
How could you, what advice could you give us on dealing with failure?
Yeah, just overcome it. Look at it as a learning lesson. Overcome it. Now, my wife says I have the world's most selective memory, because I'll get up and give a presentation and we'll talk about the companies that have all worked, and she'll say, what about company X, Y, and Z? And I'll say, I don't remember them. And you could put me on a lie detector and I probably wouldn't remember them. And I think it's a gift, not a problem. I'm happy to forget those things. I'm happy that I learned something from them, hopefully. Sometimes it takes me a couple tries. But I learn from those things and overcome them and then react, but I do not stop. I've always been a big fan of a flywheel. Get her going. And there's going to be things along the way that happen. That's okay. Just keep going, keep going, keep going. Yes?
Why did you want to be in the business industry?
That's a great question. I was very fortunate. I had a tremendous role model in my father, a wonderful Christian man who was a good businessman, a very good businessman. It was a tough environment. I grew up in the Midwest. My family, my dad's company, we made cattle chutes and cattle pens, which people in California don't even know what they are, but it's for handling cattle. So it's a tough environment. He had 70 big, tough welders work for him. And he was a really, really good businessman, and he was known for his integrity and known for his honesty. He taught me a great business lesson. I didn't really realize it when I was about your age. One time he had me in his office when he brought a man in who had been almost like family. I mean, I'd known this guy probably all of my life to that point. And my dad had me in his office when he brought this man in, and he had caught the man stealing from the company. And he fired him. And I'm sitting there going, well, this is about the most uncomfortable moment in my young life, while he's firing this guy who's like family for stealing, and I'm sitting here. Let him go, a lot of emotion, a lot of accusations back and forth. My dad never lost his composure, said how sorry he was it happened, said but he couldn't compromise on being stolen from. The guy walked out. My dad had a side door from his office. He said, here, you don't have to go back out through the plant so everybody sees you. You can go out this side door here. So he walks him out the side door, and then my dad hustles around to the other side where the guy's car was, with me still in tow, wishing I was anywhere else in the world but right there. And he brought the man, and he stood by him, and he said, Kenny, there's something's obviously happened. Can I help you? Do you need money? Do you need time? Do you need a place to live? Do you want to borrow my car? What can I do to help you? He said, well, you can give me my job back. He said, well, no, I'm not going to give you your job back. You stole from us, but I'll do anything else for you. And he stood there and prayed with him right then. That really made me want to be in business, because I said, okay, this is really more about people than products or ideas, and I like people.
You said that the best kind of leader is the strong, silent type, but is there anything wrong with a strong, charismatic leader?
No, that's a great question. The question was, I talked about the strong, silent type, but is there anything wrong with the charismatic leader? No. They're just, no. There's nothing wrong with a charismatic leader. I don't find as often they scale over time, because they tend to create a little bit too much emotion around the moment and not enough long-term planning. But I have seen very charismatic people build very good, successful long-term companies. But they're in the minority if between the two types. But there's nothing, believe me, there is no height, weight, race, sex, age, anything like that either enables or precludes you from being a great leader. It's available to all of us all the time. Those rules will help a lot, especially the first one, the golden rule.
What is the most abstract business idea you have ever invested in?
Oh, invested in, okay. So the question was, what's the most abstract idea I've ever invested in? Sometime we'll have a meeting and we'll talk about some of the ones I've heard that I haven't invested in. Those will give you laughs for hours. This was a pretty abstract idea. It happened to work. I have a terrible memory for things that didn't work. And like I said, I consider it a gift. 4 Berkeley PhD students, they were all in their early 20s, 22 to 25 years old. They were getting their PhDs from Berkeley, came to see me 15 years ago. and said they wanted to basically bend the laws of physics in how power was consumed in portable devices. Well, portable devices 15 years ago weren't very portable, and they didn't consume much power, but they believed that things like this were going to exist. We didn't call it an iPhone, and we didn't talk about it much like this, but they believed things like this were going to exist. And so they set out in a tiny, tiny office, half the size of this stage. The four of them were going to school and working on this idea, and it worked. A company called Volterra, which sold recently for about $1.3 billion, $1.3 billion. But they worked for 3.5 years in very quiet, doing math algorithms and things like that, basically saying that the laws we understood and how power is consumed in silicon devices may not be right. We can actually change it. And in my world, you have to be careful talking about money, because in my world, the numbers are pretty big. But let's just say they consumed less money in 3.5 years than most companies we work with use in a month. And at the end of the 3.5 years, they came to me and said, we did it, it works, but we just feel terrible, we spent this much money. And I said, good. Good on both those fronts. Good that it works, good that you did it. And so they really had a big idea, and it really worked. The crazy ideas we see all the time are people wanting to build nuclear generators out of 20 iPhones, things like this. You'd be surprised some of the funny things people send us. Or people want to build an iPhone competitor. I thank them. Say, good luck, let me know how that goes. Do that with someone else's money. Let's see, one or two more.
How did you start your company?
I'm sorry?
How did you start your company?
How did I start my company? Well, you're going to hate this answer, but it was the beginning of the personal computer industry, and no one knew anything about them, and I liked them. And people thought people still think I'm goofy, but they actually thought I was more goofy at that moment in my life, because I didn't have anything to fall back on. And so I followed a passion. First time I sat behind a Radio Shack TRS-80, I said, this is cool. This is where I'm going. And I was very fortunate. I married my high school girlfriend who went, I have no idea what you're talking about, but let's go. Just for the record, she could tell you that we had success, and then, I don't use that other word, and we had success, and then we had to, so I think 3 different times in our life she had to sell all the furniture and do everything like that so we could never be late on a payment of anything, but she never said a word. And today, if I told her I goofed up again and everything's gone, she'd go, whatever, which helps a bunch to have that kind of support. She would just look at me like I knew this was coming, so. I followed a dream to answer the question. Go ahead.
When you invest in companies, do you think the main thing that you give them is resources or advice?
Great question. The question was, when we invest in companies, is the main thing we give them resources or advice? And the answer is, we try to give them what they need. We try not to make it formulaic. We try not to say, okay, well, here's how the last 7 companies have worked, so here's how yours is going to work. So follow this, here's the workbook, follow this form, and it'll all work. Some of them need capital. They know exactly what they're doing. They've got great skills. They've got great experience. They've got a big idea, and all they need is some capital to go buy equipment, lease offices, and hire people. Those are my favorite ones. Congratulations. Do you need me? Nope. Okay, thanks. You need a meeting? No, everything's good. And then some of them say, okay, I've got a big idea. You backed me. Now what do I do? Okay? So we try to really respond to what their needs are. We do not try to either overmanage or make it a formula, because either one of those are destined to failure. The first time, the joke I use, and you won't get this, there's some subtleties in here, but some of you will. The only, what's worse than a venture capitalist running your company? Nothing. Nothing. You need to run your own company.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
So what factor would be common in companies that are successful versus those that aren't?
The number one factor, by far, we've studied it, we've looked at it, we've had outsiders look at it. The number one factor is the quality of the leadership of the team and how cohesive that team is at overcoming the challenges that are going to happen. None of them are straight up and to the right. I remember in 2004 and 5 when people came up to me and said, wow, I've heard about Google. This thing's really taking off. Congratulations. I say, well, we invested 6.5 years ago. It hasn't been exactly up and to the right. And they, oh. So it's the persistence of the team. And that's, by the way, probably the best team ever. Larry and Sergey and their team, the people they hired. Last one, which is where? You're all pointing over here. You're pointing down.
Do you think that with the way that the world has progressed, and politics, has it been harder to run a company?
Great question. So can I paraphrase a little bit and tell me if I take your meaning away? With the new level of regulation and the new good policies, has it gotten harder or easier than 20 years ago? Yeah, way harder. Way harder. It was easier to start a company when there was less regulation and less policy. However, I have not seen a company fail that we've been involved in because of policies or procedures. So the answer to your question is important. It's easier. It was easier, but it is by no means an excuse. I'm a no excuses guy. If somebody tells me, well, we failed because of some policy change in Congress, they better be fast, runner. Because if I catch them, it's not going to be good. So it's harder, but not an excuse. And certainly not a reason not to start a company. Still a lot of greenfield out there. Okay, that's it. Dr. Doherty, anything else?
Thank you.